Welcome to the Student Astronaut Challenge 2020 Coaches Training discussion of Flight Simulation Communication Guidelines. In this segment, I want to talk about the proper communication protocol, what the parts of it are, why it's done that way, give some examples of it so you can understand it. Then I want to talk about how the flight engineer processes the checklist and make sure that things are done correctly. And then we want to touch on the emergency process from the communications point of view. So first off, obviously, it's having accurate communications between the shuttle and ground control is extremely important in our simulation flights. It's obviously very important in any flight. So to maintain this control, NASA has created a structure, a communications protocol, and it's comprised of 3 items in a specific order. So the first is who is being addressed. Okay, who is going to receive the information that's being asked for? And that can be a person, it could be mission commander, it could be the pilot, it could be the mission director, or it can be a group such as mission control. You're addressing the entire mission control group, or enterprise. You're addressing the entire shuttle. The second item is who is speaking. Once again, this is either a person, such as pilot, flight engineer, or a group, such as mission control or Atlantis. And the third item is the information. What do you want them to do? What information do you want to get from them? What do you want to tell them? So just remember, it's very important. You have who is being addressed. That tells everybody on the communications network who you want to talk to. Who is speaking lets them know who you are, gives them an idea of what's coming. And third is the information that you're going to be talking about. So that's the protocol for communications. So 2 parts of the mission control communication are in-flight communications have an advise and an announce category. The advise category is when information is being provided that is critically important and it requires a response. You have to confirm that you heard that and got the information back. So if an example is mission control, that's who's you're talking to. This is the mission commander, that's who's talking. Be advised, we are receiving a caution and warning on the APU system. That's the information. Okay, by including be advised, you're telling the mission commander is telling mission control, here's a problem. We need you to confirm that you see the same problem. Another way to phrase it is mission control, this is the mission commander. We are receiving a caution and warning on the APU system. Do you confirm? So by including either be advised or do you confirm, you're telling whoever you're addressing that this is an advisement and I have to have a response. And you should not continue on until you get the response. That's part of an advisement is you've got to get the response back. Okay, the other side of that is an announcement. Quite often information is relayed to either mission control or the space shuttle crew that is important to know, but you don't have to confirm that you got it. And an example is Atlantis. That's who we're talking to. We're talking to the whole shuttle. This is mission control, so the whole mission control group's talking to you. APU pre-start check is underway. So what you're telling them is your auxiliary power unit pre-start check has begun. Okay, it's good for them to know that, but it's not a critical issue at this point, so they don't have to respond. So that's an announcement, not an advisement. So now we'll go to the shuttle crew. Within the shuttle crew, the mission commander is obviously the commander of the entire flight. Primarily, the mission commander is the primary officer responsible for talking with mission control during flight operations, particularly critical flight operations. However, the pilot and the flight engineer may be tasked by the mission commander to handle certain things, in particular telemetry checks and mission control requests. This frees up the mission commander from the responsibility of always being the point of contact to let them do other things, which is particularly important when they are having to manually fly the simulator or there's an emergency going on and they need to be checking other things. So that's where the pilot and the flight engineer can take over those tasks. The flight checklist process. This is the very critical process that's set up and it's driven by the flight engineer. So the process for the checklist is a two-person confirmation. The flight engineer is responsible for reading the checklist. Okay, so they have the printed out checklist, pilot, mission control, actually everybody has a checklist, has a copy of it. The flight engineer will read the item on the checklist. The flight officer, mission commander, or pilot who has those specific switches or is responsible for those switches will actually repeat the command as they set the switch. And then the other flight officer who is not actually touching the switch and moving it is watching, visually verifying that the switch was set to the correct position. So the flight engineer reads it, the appropriate flight officer sets the switch, and then the other flight officer visually confirms and announces that that switch was done. So an example of that is the flight engineer reading the checklist. APU hydraulics, 1, 2, 3 to off. Okay, the mission commander has those switches on his side panel. So the mission commander will go APU hydraulics, 1 to off, 2 to off, 3 to off. And then the pilot who is watching will go APU hydraulics 1, 2, 3 to off, check. So the whole flow of that will be APU hydraulics 1, 2, 3 to off, APU hydraulics 1 to off, 2 to off, 3 to off, APU hydraulics 1, 2, 3 to off, check. Now the reason the person doing the switches breaks it up is very important, and because it comes into play during an emergency situation. The reason you want to set one switch at a time is if, say, you had an emergency that dealt with hydraulics, and one of these systems could be the one causing the emergency. Well, if the mission commander went AP hydraulics 1, 2, 3 to off and set all three off at the same time, and the emergency went away, you wouldn't know which of the three systems was the problem. But by going APU hydraulics 1 to off, APU hydraulics 2 to off, APU hydraulics 3 to off, then you'll see which one of those corrects the error. So always remember that it's best if the system has more than one switch, make sure you do only one switch at a time. It is better for the system because you're doing them staggered, so you're not just killing an entire system at once. Plus the fact it gives you the opportunity to see what happens when that specific individual switch is set. So just remember to do multiple switches one at a time. Now, mission control crew. The mission control members support the entire mission by monitoring the flight checklist. They listen to everything that's going on. They monitor, they keep track of it because they want to make sure nothing gets missed. If something gets missed, they should speak up and say, Atlantis is the mission control. We noticed that the third switch for the APU hydraulics was not turned off. Can you correct that? And then they'll get it corrected. They also will monitor telemetry readouts of their systems because they have them displayed in front of them, and they will confirm that with the flight crew. Now, like we've said before, the flight crew can also initiate telemetry readings with mission control. So you're still getting the telemetry checks back and forth to make sure both systems are agreeing and the communications is functioning. As we've mentioned earlier, mission control will also announce items. An announcement does not require a response, but it's just information that's provided to the flight crew so that they know when certain systems are starting or stopping. Okay, let's turn to the emergencies. What I want to do is talk about the process for the emergencies and how the communications occur during the emergencies. During an emergency, Mission Control takes full responsibility and control of the flight to resolve the problem. This is done because Mission Control has the emergency procedures, checklist, and the system schematics. So, once a problem is identified, either by Mission Control or by the flight crew, and they have agreed on the problem by checking and reviewing telemetry readouts, then Mission Control takes responsibility for the problem. Okay, so once, it's like all of a sudden, it's like at Mission Control, this is Atlantis. We have a warning on APU hydraulics. Mission Control will turn around and say, oh, Atlantis, this is Mission Control. We confirm that you have a warning on hydraulics. Okay, that tells you there's an emergency in the hydraulic system, and that's how they'll start the identification. So once it's identified, Mission Control will look in the emergency procedures checklist manual to try and locate an emergency procedure identifying that particular problem. If they find one, they will then walk the shuttle crew through managing the problem by reading the checklist to the shuttle, mainly to the flight engineer and the pilot, and having them, and mission commander, because his switches may come into play, and having them change switch settings either from their current state to off or to on, depending on how it is, or to a high or low speed. So, and they do this one switch at a time, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to take a system and narrow it down in the whole system to one particular piece that's not working correctly. So they'll start at the top and they'll turn things off or change the switch settings, and eventually, because there's an emergency procedure for it, they will hit the one item that clears the emergency. Now, once you've got the emergency cleared, you still have to finish the procedure. You can't just go back to flight at that point because you've turned off other systems that you will need. So always remember, you always finish an emergency procedure once you start it. Even if it ends up taking you somewhere else, you still will come back to that point in the emergency procedure and finish that checklist. Now, if they don't find a checklist, emergency checklist that has the problem in it, they have to go to the system schematics. Once they go to the system schematics, they will be working with the flight engineer in particular, but also the pilot and commander, to step through different systems based on the schematic diagrams, turning on and off parts of the system. And these are pretty much so isolated to the flight engineer switches. Same process, they'll do it one at a time. Once they isolate the problem, then they'll back out the changes they've done, and they'll be back in the situation where they're where they were and the emergency has been resolved. And at that point, they're ready to go back to normal flight operations with one important step left. After an emergency, Mission Control will lead the discussion on whether to abort or continue the mission. Now, all that means is they're just going to start the discussion. Okay, what's everybody's opinion on whether we abort or continue and why? If it's a redundant system and only one part of it was broken, then you can probably continue. If it's an isolated single system and you've had to turn it off, chances are you'll have to abort. So everybody has an opinion. Everybody can make their case for abort or continue. But the mission commander has the final call. And if the mission commander calls an abort, then you immediately do the abort. If the mission commander decides, okay, we're going to continue, then you go ahead and continue and you keep flying. So that's how that process works. And Mission Control drives that. As soon as you get back to normal flight operations, then it's back to Mission Control being responsible. The flight engineer being responsible for the checklist and the mission commander being responsible for the mission. So that covers the communication guidelines process that we've been talking about. As a quick review, just remember that the protocol for communications is who is being addressed, who is talking, and what they want. So that's the 3 steps for that. Remember that there are advisements which require a confirmation from the other side, and announcements, which is just a statement of a process or a system that is turning on or off and does not require a response. Flight engineer checklist, remember it is done with a two-step confirmation. Flight engineer reads the item to be done. The flight officer responsible for that system sets the switches one at a time. The other flight officer visually verifies and announces check that they have been done. In an emergency, remember the mission control handles the emergency. They'll use the emergency procedure checklist and the system schematics to work with the flight crew to try and resolve it. And always remember to have a discussion about abort or continue following the completion of any emergency checklist or schematic checklist. So those are the highlights of it. If you have any questions, then just contact us and we'll try and help you with additional information. So good luck and practice hard.